Good afternoon and welcome to the Word is Bond podcast. I am the moderator for this afternoon's conversation, Dr. Befrida Jackson, the Director and Research Director of Grant Administration at the Bond Educational Group. I am here this afternoon with Ms. Logan Fanning Brooks. I'm super excited for this conversation where we will delve into the education dialogue around equity, inclusion, and diversity. I'm super excited just for us to explore how equity and inclusion enter the classroom, how we cultivate equitable spaces, but then also within our schools, what does that look like specifically, a non-Band-Aid solution to ensuring and implementing what we might want to consider anti-racist practice and praxis. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Fanning, and actually I would be remiss if I did not make mention of our Equity Summit that the Bond Educational Group is putting on in February of 2022. So please go online, grab your tickets. We are very excited about the Equity Summit and truly look forward to an exceptional dialogue in February of 2022. So, Ms. Fanning Brooks, the space is yours. Please introduce us to your organization, Safe Space.
Hello. Okay, I'm so glad to be a part and have this opportunity to let you all know what's kind of going on with education. I do think it is important because of the talking points, one that we have. I am going to get straight to it. But when it comes to safe space, just know it is a learning environment that kids can be kids. We focus on the need of the child, focusing on what the kid wants as opposed to making it political. I like to keep it educational instead of political. I feel like a lot of things now with everything that's going on, you can see a lot of things are tainted by the political world. My goal is to keep it educational based and look at our founding fundamentals of how to keep kids engaged in learning, interactive, loving what they do, connecting with the lessons that they're learning, and serve as a mediator between the school and the parent, because especially now, it's needed. It is needed. You know, parents are burnt out. The child is burnt out. And then you have teachers who go, plan, and have so much going on alongside of their own lives. They're burnt out too. So we need a mediator, right? To kind of bring us all back together and work through this to get to a better space academically all together.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's basically, what safe space is in general. Right now, for the kids that I tutor, the kids that I see, it is heartbreaking to know, they're like, the parents come to me, they're like, Logan, I have a straight A student, but ever since virtual learning started, it's just been so hard. It's been so hard. My kid's not engaged. Is it a mental thing? Are they diagnosed, or do they need to be diagnosed? Or I'm like, no, but before we go there, we're quick to put ADHD or ADD on a child. Before we get there, let's just see what's going on. Let's talk to them. I had one child come and tell me she just, she doesn't like the computer. She's never been that type of person that sits at the computer all day, because she wasn't raised that way. They weren't raised, so they were forced. Now you have to integrate it. Believe it or not, I know technology is new day and age. Kids all, from the age of 3 have phones now. But you think about it, this little girl's telling me, just sitting there is hard for her. It was really, really hard. And so I like to serve as a mediator to kind of help bring that together, because we know, yes, she was straight A before she left. She's still straight A now, but it starts to affect the self-esteem of the child. Why am I not doing good? Or why am I, getting in trouble? Or, why am I now all of a sudden in virtual conferences? These things play a part. And because of everything that's going on, it's so hard to keep the child in mind. You say, no, it's not. Yeah, in your decision making, it's hard to keep the actual need of the learner in mind.
Right. And it sounds like your organization, that you've created a hybrid solution based on a need that was clearly evidenced. And I think, we didn't know what we didn't know when we moved into this
Mhm.
pandemic space. It sounds like your vision and your work was truly born out of some real-time examples of students that
Mhm.
expressed a need that they had previously excelled,
Mhm.
and then this pivot, and it was a substantial pivot,
Yeah.
that translated into things. I think that, there was the digital divide, right? There was the familiarity, there was comfort. All of a sudden, we had variables that
Mhm.
we hadn't been faced with. Adults did. So you can imagine that children did as well.
Yeah.
So it's exceptional to hear how Safe Space, um, how it was born in terms of really helping to fill the gap that
Yeah.
appeared that was needed within the community, in terms of your vision and work. And I think you bring to the fore a very interesting point about, yes, little ones are so adept at present with technology, with iPads and phones and all the above.
Mhm.
However, it's a different application when we're talking about
Mhm.
execution in schools, and that
Yeah.
this is your primary learning mode. So
Yeah.
yes, you can tap, 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 tap all the time, right? On your iPad, and you're looking at your gums. However, when that becomes your primary vehicle for learning,
Mhm.
that shifts, and that's different. That's a paradigm shift,
Mhm.
for many persons. So that brings to the fore this reality of inclusivity within the
Mhm.
classroom and what
Mhm.
that looks like, and creation of equitable spaces. So I do
Mhm.
want to ask you, when we think of the word equity, when we think of the word inclusion, for you, as an educator, what comes to mind most immediately? I think maybe in terms of like definitions, or in
Mhm.
terms of, because for the longest in the diversity space, we often heard about equality versus equity, right? And you heard equality a lot. And when we
Yeah.
talk about equality, we're thinking, oh, all things being equal. And that was a comfortable space to be in, right? Fast forward to more of a contemporary dialogue, and we
Mhm.
hit equity, and we're talking about allocation of resources, making sure that playing that level, that we have level playing fields. And
Mhm.
so to you, I would like to pitch that question around those words of equity and inclusion. What most immediately comes to mind would be wonderful.
Um, well, it's evident, to be equal, but when you look at honestly, when you think of inclusion, you can't think of inclusivity without change or revision. Where's the reform? What are we about to change? What are we looking at to change? Because you think of, well, yeah, inclusivity, we're gonna do it this way, we're gonna do it that way. Well, let's go back a second. Let's look at what needs to be changed. And personally, from what I've seen, it's a bigger game when you look at the curriculum. What our
Mm,
kids are learning, how they relate to what they're learning. It's a big part. Resources for
yeah,
educators. There's nothing more frustrating than wanting to teach, having a desire to teach, and you cannot do it the way you see fit
yeah.
because of a lack of resources, meaning there's a lack of support. So now we're looking at foundational and fundamental issues, from administration,
Mhm.
city, state, it goes higher and higher, but we're looking at bigger issues from, yeah, we're going to be more inclusive. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about gender. Let's talk, before you can even touch those subjects, let's look at our policy, you know,
Mhm.
because you have to see what in the policy relates to now and how can we change it to make it inclusive. If your policy and your foundation is inclusive, then now we can revert back to a navigation. We have a navigation pane on how to do it, you know? I look at when I look at the kids that I see, the ones I interact with, I can't even tell you the amount of kids each
Right.
week.
Yeah.
It's a lot. You see a lot of different perspectives, principles. They
Mhm.
think about. Th- I had one child tell me, our teacher gives us this form. She asked us, what do we want to do? Um, or asked, what do we want to do as far as being more inclusive? I said, this is a form that they gave to the parents to ask them
Hmm.
how to make the classroom more inclusive. And I
Interesting.
said, that's wrong right there. Not that we don't want our parents' consent, we do, and we will get that. But before that, how can we make a change here if the
Mhm.
change, our overhead change has not changed?
Right.
You
Right.
know, it's not, I'm not going to say it's not going to go anywhere, but it's going to make it really that much more harder,
Right.
because you have to look at people, look at a surface level change. They don't look at the fundamental. We're trying to change the core.
Right.
We have to rebuild some things in order to even get here, because like I said, think about a curriculum, and it has examples for kids to learn from, teachers to teach from. Well, reality is, can the kids relate?
Right.
Are they
Right.
relating to the information that they're learning? Is it going to make sense to them? If not, then we're sitting in class for an hour, hour and a half. We're not learning anything.
Yeah.
And now we have to go through connectivity issues. We have to go through
Mhm.
learning every other day, or we have to make sure that we're staying up to date or logging on to our next session. I can tell you now, I've seen it from my own eyes. The way that it's going, education is in a state of trouble.
Yeah.
And so for me, I believe that when you think of inclusivity, you have to think of, what can I shake up? What can I really, really change from the core, from the fund, from when it was, starting? How
Right.
can we build a new foundation? Because honestly, that's what it's going to need, a new foundation. Then we can talk about inclusivity. Then we can talk about change. You're telling me about social injustice and issues that have been going on literally since the principles of foundation began.
Mhm.
Back from, Augustine and Socrates, it, education has always been that point,
Mhm.
that has talked about the poverty of children,
Gotcha.
and where they come from, and how their environment matters, and what they do matters, and the role of the parent and the teacher. Well, now it's a shakeup. It's up in the air. You think about it,
Right.
because the foundational principles have been swayed, and they've
Right.
been built on, but it hasn't been shaken or changed. So
Right.
now we're talking about stuff to change, but we haven't developed a concrete plan to change it.
Right.
So
And there,
now what? We're back at the beginning.
right. And there needs to be a phased integration. It's not, you can have the band-aid solutions, and this kind of pivots well to among the questions that I want us to explore this afternoon, is that there is a lot of dialogue around how do we create equitable spaces, but that also needs to be strategic planning too. So in terms of what that would look like, what's the method, and it sounds, in hearing you, that the framework in and of itself needs substantial revision first. And so before we ask the question, which I mean, I do believe that it is important to make sure that all voices are heard. So internal stakeholders, external
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders, making sure that parents are pulled into the discussion. However, timing is mission critical. So,
Mm-hmm.
without that form, does speak to, I think, an evolution around communication or information sharing. The reality is that there should have been perhaps a different kind of introduction, because it almost sounds as if it was a little blinding. I have
Mm-hmm.
this form, but I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing with this form.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps there need to be some better table setting, and that table setting would help introduce the framework that was going to be posited for the purposes of introducing inclusion, or what inclusion looked like for them, and how to put that into place. None of this is instant coffee. And I think, unfortunately, we seek sometimes for short-term solutions when we've actually
Mm-hmm.
got some long-term goals that we need to
Mm-hmm.
make sure are actually executed. Um,
One one thing that I have been learning, I would say, more about, but have found so critical, is to look at, when as we dive back in, into school and learning, or what have you, you know, I believe it's important now that they cultivate an environment that's built on, I'm not gonna, yeah, built on looking at the whole child, meaning we're looking at their social, emotional, mental needs, you know? And if you do that, then you'll be able to develop a better plan. Why? Because think about it, trauma-informed teaching is needed.
Mhm.
Pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, you
Yeah,
know, kids get up,
definitely.
we have a routine, consistency.
Yeah.
Get up, we go to school, we have our lesson, we have a break, we have lunch, PE, which is your social hour. You have PE, then you go home. Well, now some of the kids that I left school with, I didn't come back to,
Yeah.
or a teacher that I left school with, I didn't come back to, on all levels across the board. That in itself is traumatic. So
Very
how can we come back and focus on book work and not address this need? You want me to focus here, and a child cannot explain everything that they feel because adults can't do it either.
no.
Sometimes you have
Of
emotions and you can't explain everything.
course,
So
of
how
course.
can we come back to a place where learning is learning? You have to address the whole need, the entire situation in that area. Well, for kids, I believe trauma-informed teaching is needed because it's not just going to help them, it will then help the instructor, who will then help administration. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's a chain reaction for a more conducive environment that deals with the whole person. Well, that's why Safe Space is very, great. And yes, it was born out of a need
Mm-hmm.
because I've seen the whole child is missing. I
Understood.
can't sit here and go over with you just this work and I see something's wrong, you know?
Right.
And it's that, oh, you miss your friends, these are important stuff for them to talk about. Because just as important for the kid, it's important for the instructor, the adult, you know? My coworkers that I left with did not come back. And it's
Right.
okay to say I'm not okay about it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I'm not okay. And so now I have to teach where I had a burning desire, a love for teaching. Now I'm a little bit angry. I'm a
Yeah.
little bit sad. And it's playing out now, whether I'm home or in the classroom, in everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because your emotion plays out in everything that you do, whether you recognize it or not, it will.
Right.
And so in order for, a change to really be made, to look at everything that's inclusive and equitable, you have to look at the whole man. Well, then if that's the case, right, and we're looking at the whole child, what they want, looking at the kids' needs, you can't do that without looking at their family dynamic.
Right.
That's where we get to what you said, communication. Very, very important. Why would I send a memo out and I haven't looked at what the need of my classroom is?
Yeah.
Yeah, the communications all. So sending out a memo, I know for me as a parent, I'm over here as a tutor and I'm looking like that completely threw me off.
Right.
If you're asking me this, what's changing?
Right.
You know?
And a whole, reframing, repurposing kind of and retooling is a very intentional and targeted process that takes time and I'll reinforce kind of the planning component, right? So, one of the questions that ended up coming to mind as you were speaking was, what do schools need to do? What do educators and classroom persons within the classroom, and there are all kinds of supports in the classroom, what do we need to do to ensure that this band-aid solution, checking the box, is not territory we accidentally navigate because we
Mhm.
want change to come so quickly. We'll often find that we'll have buzzwords. Inclusion can be a buzzword, equity can be a
Mhm.
buzzword, diversity can be a buzzword. Uh, but we don't put the thoughtful planning into what that would need to look like, how that would be implemented. And there's implementation science
Mhm.
that is critical to ensure success and efficiency of strategic plans, right? So, uh, based on what you shared as the need for the whole child, and I truly appreciate your lens around the whole child. So we're talking mental, we're talking physical, we're talking behavioral. We're talking about making all of these elements priorities when we re-examine and reframe how we define inclusion, how we apply this lens of equity into our classrooms. And you also said something earlier on in our discussion about curriculum,
Mhm.
and the mission critical need to truly examine and dissect curriculum, all the way back, as you were sharing, to kind of Socratic method, all the
Mhm.
way
Yeah.
back to how we have been socialized around education is truly
Mhm.
at the crux of this. So I ask you, what does it take? What are some concrete examples, perhaps, that you could share with the audience around schools, educators, classroom supports needing to do to implement um, non-band-aid solutions around the concepts we've shared, equity, inclusion, diversity? What do you think, in your mind's eye, would be needed?
Um, you would have, okay. I would say that before anything, you have to have someone who's willing to change. You
Gotcha.
know, um, before you look at changing policy, and I, I guess from what I've been told, rather, you know, they like the fact that I'm straight, honest, very blunt. You know, you put a lot of big words to a lot of things, but reality is you
Mhm.
have to be willing to change. If you're
Gotcha.
not willing to change, nothing will get done. You have a lot of entitled people writing, putting time and effort into something that's not going anywhere because no one's willing to make a change. Change
Gotcha.
is not easy, it's uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and but it's raw. You get to the real healing of something when change is implemented, right? Because someone's
Gotcha.
willing to put in an effort to see it change, not be so quick to say, oh, this didn't work. Did it not work, or did you try one time and stop?
Right.
It's the basic principle of change, and having a strong will that will shift a focus to anything, you know? Um, Especially, I feel very, very strongly when I say I keep it educational and
Mhm.
keep politics out. It's
Gotcha.
very hard to do that, especially in this day and time. It's very hard to do that. But when I'm working with children, I listen to them, I
Right.
hear them, and I see, okay, well, if this, like, one child, I just last week, we were going over her words. This is one of my younger ones. We're going over her words. She's about 7, and she starts singing. She
Mhm.
started singing in the middle of tutoring. She's like, I understand better when I sing. I said, okay, if that's what works.
Yeah.
I gave her the exam. Her um, teacher gave her, I think it was last year, her ending EOC assessment. And so we just wanted to go over to see how she would do this time. Aced it because
Yeah.
she sat there and was able to hum to herself, think about it, take her time. These are important factors of
Mhm.
looking at it now in a big setting. No, she can't sit there and sing, but if it's how she learns,
Yeah.
like I said, she sat there, she, hummed it or whatever, if it was through the tapping of her pencil, the tapping of her hand on her leg, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
These little things matter, believe it or not, because it made all the difference. Whereas she was going to be held back, now she doesn't have to be.
Right.
You see, it being attentive to the need of the child is so important. And so in order for that to happen, you have to look at change. You have to be willing to change. You have to look at the entire foundational, I would say, principles, what it was built on. And then we can go from there, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, what you're reinforcing is transparency. And with transparency is an element of vulnerability. And that's required kind of in this conversation, especially when needing to pivot to change. And then also to truly understanding learning styles. The child that you just made mention of, she shared her best learning style. And in the application of her best learning style, she excelled. And that's ultimately what we're seeking as we move forward. in
Yeah,
terms of the
and
labor.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just think it's very important in those cases because the parent, maybe I want to say about 1 o'clock yesterday, I
Mhm.
got an email from the parent who was very appreciative. She said, I thought I was going to have to hold my child back. Thought she was going to have to be held back. And she didn't want that. She said she had to suffer with that growing up. She didn't want that
Yeah.
for her child. And so I thought I was going to have to hold her back. And she didn't have to.
Yeah.
So now, because of that, it just made a bigger impact than what I thought, when you
Yeah.
think of
Well, and we're talking about outcomes. We're talking about outcomes. So, in closing for this afternoon, thank you so much, Ms. Vanning Brooks, for the conversation around Safe Space, introducing us to Safe Space, just telling us about your organization, sharing with us about the creation, the vision, how the idea was born, but then also sharing with us a very transparent dialogue about what you as an educator feels you feel needs to happen as we are truly to apply the concepts of equity and inclusion in our classrooms to create and cultivate equitable spaces. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much to all of our listeners. Again, please don't forget that the Equity Summit put on by the Bond Educational Group will be in February of 2022. We look forward to having you there. It will be all virtual, so please hop online and grab your tickets. Again, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much, everyone.